I'm Matt Lange. I'm an artist, producer, composer, and today we're going to be looking at the current rig I have set up. It is lots of guitar pedals and modular synthesizers, and this is Bored to Death. In my own work, I constantly use a combination of non-traditional instruments as well as traditional ones. And for instance, I love electric guitar, but I also love modular synthesizers because they offer me something that is totally different than basically anything else I've seen. They are like having a musical conversation with a robot. So I find a lot of inspiration, especially of taking modular synthesizers and then putting it through guitar pedals, because as a guitarist, who doesn't love guitar pedals? So I put together a little idea. It's just, a basic patch, a basic composition. And often with these things, the compositions are very, very basic because it's extremely difficult to do complex compositions with them. But sonic complexity, that's very, very easy to do. So I'm going to break down all the elements that I use to make this little patch. So this is my modular setup. And usually when I go to really start building a composition, I really like starting with drums just so I can have something to work with. So the first thing I usually use to make drums, it's called a DPO by Make Noise, and it stands for Dual Prismatic Oscillator, and it's very much what they would call a West Coast style oscillator as opposed to a traditional oscillator like something made by Moog or something like that. So I use this to make a kick drum, and the way I do that is I just take a sine wave and that goes to my VCA, which is a L1 Polish VCA. This is just purely an amp. And I'm using another Make Noise module called Maths. And Maths acts as two envelopes for me, so I can actually affect the pitch, and that's going to create the thump of the kick drum, as well as then the amplitude, so the length. And those two things together, they get triggered out of a sequencer. My sequencer is also another Make Noise module called Renee, which is a very bizarre and kind of finicky sequencer, and that's actually its charm. That's what makes it really unique. So those three things together are ultimately what's going to be creating my kick drum. And the other thing to really be aware of, a big part of this is the envelope I send out of Maths to create it. It's a very hard exponential envelope, so it's not like a linear do, it's going to be a unk. So if you can just visualize a hard exponential curve, that's the pitch drop that goes into the DPO, and that's going to create our kick drum. And the next part up is a snare, and this is made using a module called the Noise Engineering Basimilus Iteritas. Basically, it's a drum module and it can do bass sounds as well, but it's really meant as a one-shot percussive module. There's such a unique sound to Noise Engineering's gear in general, and maybe it's just the kinds of wave folding and distortion they do, but it has such a signature, and I love it. So I'm creating a snare out of that, and that's going to go up into an EQ called Shelves by a French company called Mutable Instruments, and that's going to give me a little bit more high end and just make it poke through the mix a little bit more. And then that also goes into our VCA, which is our amp. Then I also made hi-hats, and I made hi-hats just by using actual white noise. And the white noise just comes out of a noise module right here. It's called Quantum Rainbow. I haven't even thought about the name. I just look at it and it says noise because it has 7 different kinds of noise, and I chose purple noise, so not even white noise, because purple noise actually has a lot less low end. There's a lot more high end in there. So that is going to go directly into my amp as well. But then to create the hi-hat, then I have to gate it. So I have another envelope, which is coming out of another Make Noise Maths, and that's going to be creating basically the shape of the hi-hat. But then to also give it some life, I'm going to be modulating the length of the attack of the decay. So it's not just a tick, 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 tick all the entire time. It's going to be like tick, 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 just to give it a little bit of livelihood. And the way that's happening is there's a sequencer also by Noise Engineering called the Mimetic Digitalis, and this is going to be sequencing the length of the hi-hat. So that's just another way to kind of give this thing a little bit more life. And lastly, the thing that's going to be going through our amp, it's a vocal sample coming out of the Qubit Nebulae, which they affectionately gave me one called the Lange. First time I ever had my name on a module. And that's going to also go to our amp, and then that's going to get gated as well by also another Mimetic Digitalis gate. And that's going to be basically our whole percussive section. So I also have a bass drone. It's just basically a detuned rumble that's in D. And that's coming out of the Schweiman VCO2, which is this really incredible analog oscillator. There's really a special character about it. To make this sound, it goes from here, and it's just 2 detuned saws, and then that goes into the Ruina Versio, which is a distortion by Noise Engineering, which is frankly, the most brutal distortion I've ever used, ever. There's a button on the input where you can boost the input gain by 127 decibels, which is just sheer beautiful brutality. So then all that distortion then goes into a filter. It's a low-pass filter, it's called Ripples by Mutable Instruments, and then that gets sent out to our mixer at the end. And lastly, the thing that we have going on is this kind of hocketing, like, it's a 16th note synth, and it's just made with braids. Braids is another module by Mutable Instruments. It's a very versatile oscillator that can do something like 40 different kinds of synthesis. I'm just using a basic sawtooth out of it. So it goes to the MMF1S filter by Schweiman, which is really just the most special filter I've ever used on any synthesizer, and there's something really special about the Schweiman modules in general. But it's acting as both a filter as well as a VCA, so it's going to be, basically gating the amplitude of the oscillator, or the signal that's coming out of the oscillator, because otherwise it's just a tone that's just a the entire time. So the rhythm is really created by both the filter as well as the VCA within the filter, and then that goes up to our friend the EarthQuaker Afterneath. It's a very unique reverb in the sense that it doesn't behave like I would expect a traditional reverb to behave, and that's also the reason why I have it in here, because it really does offer something different. And what I basically have it doing is it's mostly wet. It's not 100%, there's still some dry signal coming through, but because of the mode switches where you can have these different basically forms of pitch shifting on the reverb, I have the pitch shifting actually being modulated by another sequencer down here, another one of these noise engineering, the mimetic digitalis, the MD for short is what we usually call them. So the sequence of here is basically, it's going to the drag, and it's basically going between a whole step up and a whole step down, and it's a somewhat random rhythm. So you'll kind of hear this eventually, but what it does is it takes the single note and it kind of adds, it makes it a little bit cloudy where you have, if it's a D, you've got both, an E and a C kind of like coming in at like slightly random times, and it's blurred because it is still, technically a reverb. So you get this really fascinating texture coming out of the Afterneath. And that's ultimately what goes out to our mixer. So all those combined is ultimately going to be basically the bed of sound that you'll later hear. So now let's take a look at my pedal board. My guitar is mostly running through this. There are a little bit from the modular going through a couple of these too. But again, I'm a guitar player. I love guitar pedals. And the guitar I'm using, it's a PRS CE semi-hollow. It's a very unique guitar, which is why I like it. And let's just take a look and go through what I have going on. So the first thing in the chain, at least for the guitar, it's the Katzenkönig by Catalinbread. And it was given to me actually as a Christmas present by my brother a few years ago, mainly because it has a cat on it, and it's a very kind of like brutal distortion and fuzz. I'm using it just on the front end, and this is my clean sound. And even with the gains at 0 right now, that's 0. So it's a pretty extreme pedal. I really like it. The cat looks evil, and there's a dead mouse covered in blood at the bottom of the pedal. So I'm sold. Next up, I have the EarthQuaker Devices Hoof Reaper. This pedal honestly does truly blow me away because of its sheer brutality. Even aside from the fact that you can run the two fuzzes, in series together, just alone they're really extreme. But I find, even because you have the octave switch in the middle, using that as like kind of a low gain boost, clean, and this is just the octave switch, not really engaging the fuzzes. It just has this nice little crunch to it that I really enjoy. I love the main channel, I guess the hoof channel, because it's just like super Big Muff style destruction. That kind of stuff just makes me happy on the inside. And what I've also learned is, yes, the Reaper side sounds nice in a different way too. Also really thick, but I love it when you put them together and then you engage the octave as well. Just listen to itself oscillate. I love it. You have to turn this up. so good for making noise. And the thing I actually really like about it too is even on the hoof side, you can play a kind of complex chord and it retains its clarity, which I find really helpful because I like really complex chords. You get it all. So that's why this thing is probably never leaving my pedal board ever. I really, really love this pedal. And then on the left side, this is basically like my time-based effects. And I have there's a volume pedal just in between, just to kind of also visually separate this for myself because it makes it easier for me to look at. But the first thing I have is an Eventide Rose, which is, I guess they call it, it's a hybrid delay where it's a digital delay with an analog filter. And I'm such a fan of a lot of Eventide things in general. And this delay to me is kind of the best of both worlds in the sense of you get all the features of a digital delay and you can sync it to your computer. So I'll actually use this in my own like production workflows. So I'll sync it to Pro Tools and then send stuff out, but it still sounds like a pedal as opposed to a plugin. And there really is, quite a distinction there. So I just have it set up pretty simply. I have the filter, so it's, a bit low passed. It doesn't sound as dark as, say, a Memory Man or something like that. And then you can hear the trails, and if you turn up the feedback, you get a really nice, long, kind of infinite thing that doesn't oscillate too sharply. So I love the Rose for that reason. And next up in the chain, it's the EarthQuaker Devices C Machine. And man, this is just like honestly the best chorus pedal I've ever used. I love chorus. I'm a sucker for like 80s sounds. And this thing, it just gives me like that lush. I love that. That's just the sound. And especially if I engage like a delay or a reverb after. That to me is shoegaze heaven or, post-rock heaven or whatever. So the C Machine is really a standout for me. There's really honestly no better chorus pedal to my ears. And then after that, I like going into the EarthQuaker Devices Avalanche Run, which, I love the way it combines really reverb and delay in a single pedal, but aside from the convenience of it, they do sound really good. And I find, especially for like kind of post-rock kind of sounds, which are something I do a lot. I actually spend more time playing clean than I do dirty. And so I find the Avalanche Run is really fantastic just for just this kind of like moody, melancholic kind of sounds. It's a great sound. I really, really like the Avalanche Run, and it sounds fantastic through an amp. Some pedals don't sound great through an amp, that one does. Next up on my board is the Eventide Black Hole. This is an Eventide algorithm in general I've loved for far too many years. I actually have a DSP 4000, which is one of their early harmonizers from '95 that for about 15 years existed only on the Black Hole algorithm. Now they have a pedal of just that. And so it's on my board, of course, as the last thing in my chain. It's the ultimate spacey reverb. And of course, with a name like Black Hole, you would expect that. I'm just gonna engage it and just play one big open chord. It's just lush and it's wide. And the other thing I love about it as well is there's a freeze function. So let's say I could play the same chord again, freeze it, and now I could turn the Avalanche Run back on. So I can kind of use it as almost like a looper or a little atmosphere to kind of jam on. And consequently, I will end up using Black Hole in conjunction with something like the Avalanche Run, for instance, and they pair really nicely. And it's also fantastic for doing really big swells. So with my trusty volume pedal, let's turn on the C Machine, let's turn on the Avalanche Run, and let's also turn on Black Hole, which is still frozen. Let's get rid of that. This is, I mean, pretty much unnecessary, but I love doing this kind of thing. So let's do that same kind of thing. It's so beautiful and lush, and I mean, that's why I love the C Machine really ahead of this, is then you get that really nice chorus signal that again, it just then gets totally washed out, and it just puts me into that beautiful, serene, happy place of sound. So now that we've gone through all the pedals that I'm using with the guitar, let's talk about the pedals that I'm going to be using with the Modular. And the first up that I have in line, it's the Big Distortion Sound Machine, which is a great acronym, and or provides a great acronym. It's made by, I guess, technically Debbie Ever, but it's really Dwarfcraft. And Dwarfcraft, I adore Dwarfcraft. That makes sense, right? But they forever make some of my favorite stuff. And Big Distortion Sound Machine is exactly like that. It has this wonderful panel of two cats wrestling, and it looks very adorable, and it sounds like utter destruction. To give you an example of that, here is just a beat coming out of the Modular. And here's the BDSM. It just shreds signals. And for that reason, I love that thing. It really is incredible, especially to put like big kick drums through and just blow the signal out, and then it just self-oscillates and you get these waves of destroyed noise. It's amazing. The next thing I have is the new EarthQuaker Devices Astral Destiny, and I'm using this in this case just as actually a reverb over my entire little system, but I'm using the sub mode where it puts a sub octave on your reverb, and I found that it just happened to actually work really nicely. I mean, I would never think to put, you know, an octave reverb or an octave down reverb on an entire patch, for instance, and it sounded great. So, you know what? Let's just play that, and you'll hear how that sounds with the reverb. And it's pretty subtle. You know, I'm not blowing the thing out by any means, but it really does sound fantastic. So here's our little loop. And this just gives it some space. A little bit of modulation. Last in the chain, I have the God City Instruments Jugendsteel, and this is also a pretty unique pedal in the sense that it combines a fuzz, and I'm not specifically sure what kind of fuzz it is, but it's a fuzz that then goes into basically like the EQ section of an old HM2 pedal, which is famous for the Swedish chainsaw death metal sound. I put it after the reverb because I love the sound of distortion after reverb. I think it's such a cool sound, so that's why I have my fuzz beforehand, then I get the Astral Destiny, and then I put the Jugendsteel after, just to really just destroy a signal. And I love destroying signals. It's a personal pleasure of mine. So let's hit play and see what it does. So here's the Jugendsteel. Sounds awesome. Now let's put the Astral Destiny before it. And that is why I love reverb before distortion. It just, all the artifacts that you get, they are so destructively beautiful. And that is basically how I have the pedals set up for the modular. And that combined with everything I have set up for my guitar allows me to have basically a very simple little jamming rig that is what I will use to always just kind of come up with ideas and become inspired.